Welcome, weary traveler. Come in from the evening air and find your place by the fire. Tonight we return once more to the Crossroads Inn, where an old leather journal waits upon a desk and a white candle burns without ever growing shorter. In this entry, the innkeeper writes of late summer days when the roads were dusty gold and the evenings stretched long and warm. He tells of an elderly mapmaker who arrived carrying a lifetime of journeys in her worn leather satchel, and of the travelers who crossed her path in those few remarkable days. It is a story of the roads we travel, the ones we leave behind, and how we find our way to the places that matter most. So settle in. Let the fire's warmth find you. Let the innkeeper's voice carry you gently into the night. The diary lies open. The candle flickers softly. Let us begin.
The 17th day of the 8th month, the heat has finally broken. For 3 weeks, summer pressed down upon the crossroads like a great bronze lid, shimmering above the roads and baking the earth until the wagon ruts cracked and the dust rose in pale curtains at the slightest breeze. Even the ancient oak seemed to droop beneath the weight of it, its leaves hanging limp and silver green in the motionless air. I kept the shutters half closed during the midday hours and served more cold cider than hot stew, and still the travelers arrived with their shirts stuck to their backs and their faces red with the effort of the road. But yesterday evening the wind shifted. It came from the northwest, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere beyond the hills, and by nightfall the temperature had dropped enough that I could open the windows without inviting the heat inside. This morning I woke to mist clinging to the low places along the eastern road, burning off slowly as the sun climbed, and the air held that particular quality of late summer, when the season begins to remember that autumn waits just beyond the horizon. I have always loved these transitional days. They feel liminal somehow, balanced between what was and what will be. The inn seems to breathe differently during such times, as if it too senses the turning of the wheel. The common room was quiet through the afternoon. A merchant from the southern lowlands sat in the corner nursing a mug of small beer, his wagon loaded with bolts of linen cloth that he was transporting to the frontier settlements in the west. He was a taciturn man, content to rest in the coolness of the stone walls and say little, and I left him to his thoughts while I swept the floors and checked the stores in the root cellar. It was nearly evening when she arrived. I heard the creak of the front door and looked up from where I was wiping down the long table near the fireplace. The light was golden and slanting through the western windows, catching the dust motes that hung suspended in the air, and silhouetted against that amber glow stood a figure I did not at first recognize as human. She was small, bent at the shoulders in the way of those who have spent decades leaning over close work, and she carried a leather satchel so large and so stuffed with papers that it seemed impossible her thin frame could support it. She took a step forward, and the light found her face. She was old, older than anyone I'd seen pass through these doors in some time. Her skin was weathered to the color of old parchment, creased with the fine lines of a life lived largely outdoors, and her hair, what remained of it beneath a faded blue headscarf, was white as fresh milk. But her eyes, when they met mine, were sharp and clear as mountain water. "Welcome," I said, moving toward her. "Please, come in and rest." She studied me for a long moment, those keen eyes taking my measure with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to reading landscapes at a glance. Then she and the expression transformed her face entirely, revealing something almost girlish beneath the accumulated weight of years. "You must be the innkeeper," she said. Her voice was stronger than I expected, with a rasp to it that spoke of decades of use. "I have heard of this place. They say a white candle burns here that never grows shorter." I glanced toward the mantel, where the candle stood in its simple holder, its flame barely visible in the daylight, but present nonetheless. "They say many things about many places," I replied, "but you are welcome here regardless of what brought you. May I take your bag?" She clutched the satchel closer to her chest, a reflexive gesture that told me everything I needed to know about its importance to her. "No," she said, then softened. "Forgive me, I have carried this too long to let it go easily, even for a moment. But I would be grateful for a meal and a bed if you have them." "I have both," I assured her, "and a chair by the fire, if you would like to rest while I prepare something." I led her to the table nearest the hearth, though with the mild evening I had not yet lit the fire. She lowered herself onto the bench with the careful movements of someone whose joints protested such activities, and when she was settled, she placed the leather satchel on the table before her. As if it were a sleeping child, she was reluctant to disturb. I brought her water first, drawn cold from the spring behind the inn, and she drank deeply. Then I set about preparing a simple meal, slicing bread from the loaf I'd baked that morning and ladling out a bowl of the cold cucumber soup I had made to combat the recent heat. As I worked, I watched her from the corner of my eye. She had opened the satchel. Inside, I could see papers of every size and condition. Some were yellowed with age, their edges soft and worn. Others looked newer, the parchment still crisp, and all of them, every single sheet I could glimpse, bore the intricate lines and careful notations of maps. "You are a cartographer," I said, bringing her the food. She looked up, and something in her expression shifted. Pride, perhaps, or the bone-deep satisfaction of someone who has spent their life doing work they were meant to do. "I was," she said. "For 63 years, I mapped the northern passes when I was young enough to climb them. I charted the coastal routes when the sailing masters would take me aboard their ships. I drew the roads through the frontier territories before half of them had names." She touched the papers in her satchel with a tenderness that made my throat tighten. "These are my life's work. Every journey I ever took, every road I ever walked, all of it. Here, that is quite a collection," I said, and I meant it. "The satchel must have held hundreds of maps." She nodded, but something in her face had changed, a shadow passing behind her eyes, quickly hidden. "It is, and now I am taking it to someone who might find it useful. My granddaughter. She lives in a settlement 3 days west of here. She is a teacher there, and I thought perhaps her students might benefit from these old charts." She paused, looking down at her weathered hands. "I have never met her. My daughter and I were estranged for many years before she died. I did not even know I had a granddaughter until last winter, when a letter found its way to me. I said nothing. There are moments when silence is the only appropriate response, when any words would be an intrusion upon a private grief." She ate her soup slowly, methodically, the way one does when one has learned not to waste food or take it for granted. Outside, the light continued to deepen, shifting from gold to amber to the first hints of rose. The merchant in the corner finished his beer and retired upstairs, nodding to us as he passed. I lit the candles, including the white one on the mantel, and its flame seemed to brighten as if in greeting. The cartographer, whose name I had not yet learned, watched me light the white candle with particular interest. "There is something strange about that flame," she said quietly. "It does not move as fire should." I looked at the candle. Its flame burned straight and steady, untouched by the slight drafts that made the other candles flicker. She was right, of course. It had always been that way. "It was a gift," I said, "from a woman who passed through here many years ago. She told me to welcome everyone who came to this door. I have tried to honor that request." The cartographer nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the flame. "I have seen many strange things in my travels," she said. "Roads that seemed to lead somewhere and then simply stopped. Rivers that flowed uphill for a quarter mile before remembering their proper course. A forest in the far north where every tree grew in perfect spirals, like frozen whirlwinds." She finally looked away from the candle and met my gaze. "The world is full of small mysteries. Most people walk right past them, but if you pay attention, if you really look, you begin to see that the maps we draw are only approximations. The land itself remembers things we have forgotten." I thought about this as I finished my evening tasks. The cartographer retired early, climbing the stairs to the private room I'd prepared for her with her precious satchel clutched against her chest. I could hear her footsteps overhead, the creak of the bed as she settled in, and then silence. The common room was empty. The fire I had finally lit crackled softly, more for atmosphere than warmth. I sat at my desk in the alcove beneath the stairs and opened this journal, and for a long moment I simply looked at the blank page before me. She was right about the maps being approximations. I have thought this myself in quieter moments. The roads that pass through this crossroads are ancient, older than anyone remembers, and sometimes I wonder if they lead to the same places they led when they were first laid down. Sometimes I wonder if the crossroads itself is constant, or if it shifts and changes when no one is looking, presenting different paths to different travelers depending on what they need to find. These are strange thoughts for a late summer evening. Perhaps it is the heat finally breaking, the change in the air that makes everything feel slightly unfamiliar. Or perhaps it is the old cartographer and her satchel full of memories, reminding me that every journey is also a story, and every map is also a kind of hope. The white candle burns on the mantel. The night deepens outside, and somewhere upstairs, a woman who has spent her entire life drawing paths through the wilderness is sleeping with 63 years of wandering pressed against her heart. I will write more tomorrow. There is something about her presence here that feels significant, though I cannot yet say why. The candle flame seems to agree with me. It has been leaning toward the stairs all evening, as if listening for something, as if waiting. The 18th day of the 8th month. Morning. I woke before dawn, as I always do, and went downstairs to begin the day's preparations. The common room was cool and dim. The fire burned down to gray coals, and the white candle still burned steadily on the mantel, its flame no shorter than it had been the night before. The cartographer was already awake. I found her sitting at the long table near the windows, her satchel open before her, and maps spread across the wooden surface like a patchwork quilt. The early light, pale and pearl gray, illuminated her work, and she was so absorbed in whatever she was doing that she did not notice my approach. I stood for a moment, simply watching. Her hands moved across the papers with the sureness of long practice, tracing lines and comparing notations, occasionally making small marks with a stub of graphite she held between her fingers. There was something beautiful about it, the way she engaged with her life's work, as if renewing an old acquaintance. "You are up early," I said, and she started slightly, then smiled. "Old habits," she replied. "When you have spent most of your life waking with the sun to catch the best light for surveying, your body forgets how to sleep past dawn." I brought her tea, a blend of chamomile and mint that I thought might suit the morning, and she accepted it gratefully. Then I sat across from her, as I sometimes do with guests who seem to want company, and looked at the maps spread between us. They were extraordinary. I am no expert in such things, but even I could see the skill and care that had gone into their creation. The lines were precise but not mechanical, rendered with a hand that understood the difference between accuracy and truth. Topographical features were marked with delicate shading that suggested hills and valleys without overwhelming the practical information of the routes themselves. And in the margins, in handwriting, so small I had to lean close to read it, were notes and observations that spoke of a life spent truly seeing the world. "This one," I said, pointing to a map that showed a mountain pass I did not recognize. "When did you make this?" She leaned forward, and something in her face softened. "That was the Thornback Pass," she said. "Surveyed it when I was 24. It took me 3 weeks to chart properly because the weather kept changing, revealing different aspects of the terrain. I nearly fell twice." She touched the edge of the paper with a tenderness that made my chest ache. It was one of the happiest times of my life. We sat together in comfortable silence as the light grew stronger outside. I learned that her name was Ilara, though she said it almost reluctantly, as if she had grown unaccustomed to introducing herself. For the past decade, she told me, she had lived alone in a small cottage in the eastern hills, no longer traveling, but still mapping from memory, still adding details to charts she had drawn decades before as new recollections surfaced. The journey here had taken her nearly 2 weeks. It was the first time in 5 years she had traveled more than a day from her home, and she admitted that she had almost turned back several times. "But the letter," she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from beneath her shawl. "My granddaughter wrote to me. She said she had heard stories about me from her mother before she died, and she wanted to meet me if I was willing. She wanted to know about the maps." "May I?" I asked, and Ilara nodded, handing me the letter. The handwriting was neat and careful, the script of someone who had been taught penmanship and valued it. The words were simple but heartfelt. The writer, whose name was Mira, explained that she had grown up hearing fragments of stories about a grandmother who made maps of wild places, and that after her mother's death, she had spent 2 years trying to trace the family connections until she found Ilara's address. She did not ask for anything. She only said that if Ilara ever wanted to visit, she would be welcome. "She sounds like a thoughtful young woman," I said, handing the letter back. Ilara folded it carefully and returned it to its place. "I do not know her. I do not know what kind of person she is or whether she will have any use for an old woman and her older maps. But I have carried these papers across half the known world, and I will not let them simply gather dust in my cottage after I'm gone. If there is even a chance that she might value them, I must try." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. The morning deepened around us. I began preparing the day's bread, the familiar rhythm of kneading dough, a counterpoint to the rustle of papers as Ilara continued sorting through her collection. The linen merchant came down, ate a quick breakfast of bread and cheese, and departed with barely a word, his mind clearly on the journey ahead. And then, just as the sun cleared the hills to the east and began warming the crossroads, another traveler arrived. He was young, perhaps 20 summers, with the wiry build and sun-darkened skin of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He wore the simple uniform of a courier, a leather satchel, much like Ilara's, slung across his chest, and his boots were thick with the dust of many miles. When he pushed open the door, he was breathing hard, as if he had been moving quickly. "Water," he gasped, and I moved immediately to fetch it. He drank 2 full cups before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice was steadier, but still carried an edge of agitation. "I got turned around," he said, sinking onto the nearest bench. "I have traveled this route a dozen times, but somehow I missed the western fork and ended up going in circles for half the morning." He shook his head. "I do not understand it. The road was exactly where it should be, and then suddenly it was not." Ilara looked up from her maps. Her sharp eyes studied the young courier with interest. "Which fork do you mean?" she asked. "The one that splits north of the old stone bridge, or the newer path that was cut through the bramble grove 10 years back?" The courier stared at her. "How do you know about the bramble grove path? That is not on any map I have seen." Ilara smiled, and there was something in that smile that I could not quite name. "I made the map," she said simply. 30 years ago, before the path was cut, when it was still just a game trail used by deer and the occasional hunter, I noted it as a potential route because the terrain was favorable, and I suppose someone eventually had the same idea. The courier continued to stare, his expression shifting from confusion to something like wonder. Then he leaned forward, his earlier agitation forgotten. "You are the one they call the old cartographer," he said. "I have heard stories. They say you mapped roads that no one else could find. They say some of your charts show paths that appear and disappear, depending on who is looking at them." Ilara's smile faded slightly. "People say many things," she replied, "most of them exaggerations or misunderstandings. I simply paid attention to the land. The roads were always there. I just wrote down what I saw." But the courier was not satisfied. He reached into his own satchel and pulled out a worn piece of paper, a commercial map of the sort produced in the coastal cities and sold to travelers for a few copper coins. He spread it on the table beside Ilara's more elegant charts. "Look," he said, pointing to a spot where several roads converged. "This is the Western Territory, the area I have been traveling through. According to this map, there are 3 main routes from the coast to the frontier, but I keep hearing about a 4th road, an older one that runs through the northern forest. No one I ask can tell me exactly where it is, but they all swear it exists." Ilara studied the commercial map with the patient attention of a scholar, examining a student's work. Then she began shuffling through her own papers, her weathered fingers moving with surprising deftness, until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, laying an older map beside the commercial one. "This is the region as I surveyed it 40 years ago. You see this line here running through the northern edge of the forest?" She traced a faint route with her fingernail. "That is the old road. It was built, they say, before the current kingdom was established, by people who no longer exist. Parts of it have been swallowed by the trees, but sections remain passable if you know where to look." The courier leaned close, his eyes wide. "Why is it not on the new maps?" "Because the people who make the new maps have never walked it," Ilara said simply. "They copy from each other generation after generation, and each time something is lost. Roads that fall out of use are the first to disappear, then landmarks that seem unimportant, then the small details that give a map its truth." She touched her own aged chart with something like sadness. "A map is only as honest as the person who made it. And most people, when they make maps now, are more interested in what is useful than what is real." The courier sat back, processing this. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the implications of what she was saying spreading outward like ripples on still water. "Could you show me?" he asked quietly. "The old road, I mean. Could you draw it for me so I could find it?" Ilara looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. "Why do you want to find it?" He hesitated, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or something deeper. "I have been carrying messages between the coast and the frontier for 3 years, he said. Back and forth, always the same routes, always knowing exactly where I'm going. But lately, I have begun to feel like I am missing something, like there are paths I should be walking that I have somehow overlooked." He paused, struggling to find the words. I thought that maybe if I could find a road that was not on any map, it might help me understand what I am looking for. Ilara did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me, and there was a question in her gaze that I could not quite interpret. I thought of what she had said the night before about the land, remembering things we have forgotten. I thought of the way the white candle flame had been leaning toward her, as if drawn by something. And I thought of my own role here at the crossroads, welcoming travelers and giving them space to find what they need. "You should stay," I said to the courier. "Rest for the day. There is no urgency that cannot wait a few hours, and Ilara has much wisdom to share if you're willing to listen." The courier looked between us, and slowly he nodded. The morning stretched on. The light through the window shifted from pale gray to warm gold, and Ilara began to tell stories of the road she had walked, while the courier listened with the rapt attention of someone who has just discovered a door they did not know existed. and the white candle on the mantel burned on, its flame steady and bright, leaning ever so slightly toward the table where an old woman and a young man sat together, surrounded by maps of a world that was far larger and stranger than most people ever imagined. I returned to my work, kneading bread and preparing the stew for the evening meal, but I kept my ears open. The stories Alara told were not like ordinary travel tales. They were quieter, more contemplative, full of small details that revealed hidden truths. She spoke of a valley in the northern mountains where the snow never melted, even in high summer, because the shadows of the peaks fell across it at exactly the right angles to block the sun. She described a river delta in the southern wetlands where the channels shifted with every tide, so that her maps of the region included notations on the time of day and the phase of the moon, without which they were useless. She told of a forest in the west where the trees grew so tall and so close together that no light reached the ground, and the path through it was marked not by sight, but by sound, the echo of footsteps changing subtly as you moved from true path to false trail. The courier listened to all of this with growing wonder, and I found myself drawn in as well, pausing in my work to hear her speak of places I had never seen and likely never would. But the story that stayed with me longest was the last one she told before midday. "There is a road," she said, her voice dropping lower as if sharing a secret, "that I found only once, many years ago. It was in the far eastern territories, near the coast, in an area that had been settled for centuries. I was surveying a region that had been mapped many times before, looking for small corrections and updates to bring the older charts into agreement with the current landscape." She paused, and her eyes grew distant. "I was walking along a cliff-top path, following the edge of the sea, when I noticed something strange. The grass at my feet was bent in a particular way, as if something had passed over it recently, though I could see no tracks or signs of disturbance. I followed the bent grass, curious, and it led me to a place where the cliff curved inward, creating a small, sheltered cove invisible from the main path. And there, at the back of the cove, hidden by an outcropping of rock, was a road." The courier leaned forward. "A road?" "A road," Ilara confirmed, "paved with smooth white stones, each one fitted perfectly against its neighbors, leading down toward the water and then simply ending at the tide line. I walked its length, perhaps 50 paces, and when I turned to look back, I could see where it continued up the cliff face, climbing through a narrow gap in the rocks that I had somehow failed to notice. Where did it go?" She shook her head. "I do not know. I followed it for perhaps an hour, climbing steadily upward, passing through terrain that did not match any of my surveys of the region. And then I emerged onto a headland overlooking the sea. And when I turned around, the road was gone. 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 I searched for hours, retracing my steps, looking for any sign of it. But the gap in the rocks had vanished. The cove was empty of anything but sand and tide pools, and the bent grass that had led me there was standing straight, as if no one had ever passed through it. She was silent for a long moment. "I never found that road again," she said finally. I went back to that cliff top many times over the years in different seasons, at different times of day. Nothing, but I drew it anyway. She touched one of the older maps in her collection. It is here on this chart, a road to nowhere marked in the margin, with a note saying that it may not be there when you look for it. The courier sat back, his expression troubled. That is impossible. Ilara smiled, but there was no humor in it. Yes, and yet I walked it. I felt the stones beneath my feet, worn smooth by centuries of use. I saw the sea from that headland, stretching out to the horizon like hammered silver. It was real, even if I could never find it again. She looked at me then, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. The world is full of roads like that, she said. Paths that appear and disappear, that exist only for certain people at certain times. Most map makers do not draw them because they cannot be verified, cannot be relied upon. But I have always believed that the unreliable paths are often the most important ones. They lead to places we need to find, even if we do not know we are looking. The courier was quiet for a long time after that. I could see him wrestling with what he had heard, trying to fit it into his understanding of the world. I returned to my work, but Ilara's words stayed with me. I thought of the crossroads outside, where two ancient roads met and travelers paused to decide their direction. I wondered, not for the first time, whether those roads were always the same roads or whether they changed somehow when no one was watching. The white candle flame flickered slightly, as if in agreement with my thoughts. By midday, the heat was beginning to build again, though it remained gentler than the previous weeks. The courier had fallen asleep in the corner, exhausted from his morning's confusion and the weight of Ilara's stories. The old cartographer herself had returned to her maps, sorting and organizing with quiet dedication, and I sat at my desk writing these words, wondering what the rest of the day would bring. The crossroads is quiet now, but I have learned that quiet moments at this place are often the prelude to something unexpected. The inn has a way of drawing travelers together at precisely the right time, connecting stories that might otherwise never intersect. I suspect we are in the middle of such a moment now. I can feel it in the air, like the shift in pressure before a storm. Whatever comes next, I will be ready. The fire is laid, the bread is rising, and the white candle burns on, lighting the way for whoever needs to find it. The 18th day of the 8th month, afternoon. The heat of midday had settled over the crossroads like a drowsy cat. Warm, but not oppressive. Encouraging stillness and shade. The courier still dozed in his corner, his breathing slow and even. And Ilara had finally set aside her maps to rest her eyes, though she remained at the table with her hands folded across the leather satchel, as if guarding it even in sleep. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the evening stew when I heard the wagon pull up outside. It was a modest vehicle, the kind farmers use to transport goods to market, with wooden sides weathered to silver gray and wheels that creaked with the particular sound of axles too long without proper greasing. A single draft horse stood in the traces, its head hanging low with exhaustion, and the driver was already climbing down when I reached the door. She was a woman of middle years, perhaps 50 summers, with strong shoulders and hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. Her dress was simple and practical, the color of undyed wool, and her hair was pulled back beneath a kerchief that had once been white but had faded to cream with many washings. There was something in her face, a particular set to her jaw, and a distance in her eyes that told me she was carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the bundles piled in her wagon. "Welcome," I said, stepping out to meet her. "You look as though you have traveled far." She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being addressed with warmth, or the reflexive caution of someone who has grown unused to kindness. "Far enough," she said. Her voice was low and rough, like river stones tumbling together. "I am looking for a place to rest for the night. My horse needs water and feed, and I could use a meal if you have one to spare." "I have both," I assured her. "The stable is around the side. There is fresh water in the trough and hay in the loft. Take whatever time you need. When you are ready, come inside, and I will have food waiting." She nodded once, a gesture that was almost military in its precision, and led her horse toward the stable without another word. I returned to my kitchen work, but I kept an ear tuned to the sounds outside. The creak of the stable door, the patient murmur of a woman talking to her horse, the words indistinct but the tone gentle, the splash of water as the animal drank. These are the sounds of traveling, the small rituals that mark the end of one stretch of road and the beginning of rest. When she finally came inside, perhaps half an hour later, the common room had stirred slightly. The courier had woken and was sitting with Ilara. The two of them bent over one of her older maps and speaking in low voices. They both looked up as the farmer entered, and I saw them take her measure just as I had done, reading the lines of her face and the set of her shoulders. She paused in the doorway, uncertain, and I stepped forward to guide her. "Here," I said, gesturing to a table near the window. "Sit and rest. I have stew warming and bread fresh from this morning. What would you like to drink? I have ale, cider, and tea." "Tea," she said, lowering herself onto the bench with the careful movements of someone whose body has learned to protect itself from the small jolts and jars of constant labor. "Please." I brought her chamomile, sweetened with a touch of honey, and she wrapped her hands around the cup as if drawing comfort from its warmth despite the summer heat. For a long moment she simply sat there, breathing in the steam, her eyes fixed on something beyond the window that I suspected only she could see. The common room was quiet. The courier and Ilara had returned to their conversation, their voices a low murmur beneath the soft sounds of the afternoon. Outside, a bird sang in the oak tree, its melody bright and uncomplicated. I brought the farmer her stew and bread, setting them before her without comment. She ate slowly, methodically, the way people do when they are not sure where their next meal will come from, savoring each bite while also measuring it against future need. After a time, she looked up at me. "You are the innkeeper," she said. It was not a question. "I am." She nodded, as if confirming something she had already guessed. "This place has a reputation. They say travelers come here and find what they need, even if they did not know they were looking for it." "I have heard similar things," I admitted. "I am not sure how true they are. I only try to offer rest and food and a warm fire. If people find something more, perhaps that is their own doing. She considered this, turning it over in her mind like a stone in her hands. "I have just sold my farm," she said finally. The words came slowly, as if each one cost her something. "I worked that land for 30 years. My husband and I built the house ourselves, raised our children in it, buried him beside the apple trees when the fever took him 6 years ago." She paused, her jaw tightening. "But I could not work it alone anymore. The fields were too much for one person, and my children have lives of their own now, far from the lowlands. So I sold it to a merchant from the south, packed what I could into my wagon, and started north." "Where are you going?" She turned her gaze back to the window. "My sister lives in a village 3 days from here, near the foothills. She has room for me," she says, "a small cottage behind her house where I can live out my days without being a burden to anyone." There was something in the way she said the word burden that made my chest ache. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Leaving a place you have lived so long must be difficult." She did not respond immediately. When she spoke again, her voice was different, rougher, as if the words were being dragged up from somewhere deep. "Do you know what it is like," she asked, "to watch everything you built become someone else's? To stand in the doorway of the house you raised with your own hands and know that tomorrow someone else will be sleeping in the bed where your children were born?" She shook her head. "I thought I was ready. I thought I had made my peace with it. But when I drove away this morning, I looked back and I saw the new owner walking through my garden, touching my husband's roses, and I wanted to turn around and take it all back." She fell silent. Across the room, Ilara had stopped her conversation with the courier and was watching us, her sharp eyes taking in everything. "May I join you?" I turned to see Ilara rising from her table, gathering a few of her maps as she did. The farmer looked uncertain, but nodded, and Ilara settled onto the bench across from her, spreading the papers on the table between them. "I could not help overhearing," Ilara said. "Forgive me, but your story touched something in me." She touched one of her older maps with gentle fingers. "I, too, have spent my life building something that will eventually belong to someone else. These charts, these records of every road I ever walked, they are my life's work, just as your farm was yours." The farmer looked at the maps with something approaching curiosity. "You are a mapmaker?" "I was, for 63 years. Ilara smiled, and there was understanding in her expression. "And now I'm taking my work to my granddaughter, hoping that she might find some value in it. It is strange, is it not, the way we spend our lives creating something, pouring ourselves into it, and then one day we must let it go and trust that it will find its way to hands that will cherish it." The farmer was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out something small, something she held carefully in the cup of her palm. "My husband made this," she said, opening her hand to reveal a wooden pendant carved in the shape of a leaf, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. He was a farmer, not an artist, but he had clever hands. He carved it the year we were married, from a branch that fell from the old oak in our yard during a storm. I have worn it every day for 30 years. She looked at the pendant and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I thought about leaving it," she said softly, burying it beside him so it would stay with the land. But I could not bear to. Is that selfish? Ilara reached across the table and gently touched the farmer's hand. It is human, she said. We carry what we can. The physical things, the objects we can hold, they are not the same as the places we leave behind, but they are all we have to prove that those places were real, that we were there, and we mattered. And something of us remains even after we are gone. The farmer closed her hand around the pendant and pressed it against her heart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I moved away, giving them their privacy, and busied myself with small tasks. Wiping tables that were already clean, straightening chairs that did not need straightening. The afternoon light was beginning to shift, the first hints of evening gold creeping in through the western windows. The courier had been watching the exchange between Ilara and the farmer with something like wonder on his young face. Now he rose and approached their table, hovering uncertainly at the edge of their conversation. I am sorry to interrupt, he said, but I wanted to say something. He looked at the farmer, his expression earnest. I carry messages for a living, letters, packages, things that people need to send from one place to another. And I have learned that the things we send are never just objects. They carry pieces of us. The hope that someone far away will understand what we mean, even when we cannot find the words to say it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. When you leave your farm behind, you're not erasing it. You are trusting it to someone new the way people trust me with their letters. It will not be the same, but it will still be there. The house you built, the trees your husband planted, the life you made together, all of it remains, even if you are not there to see it. The farmer looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. The tightness around her eyes softened just slightly, and she let out a breath that seemed to release some of the weight she had been carrying. You are kind, she said. Both of you. She looked between Ilara and the courier, and then at me. All of you. I was not expecting kindness today. I was expecting to pass through this place and continue on, alone with my thoughts and my grief. But you have reminded me that the world is larger than my loss, and that there are still people in it who will sit with a stranger and share in her pain. She stood, and I thought she might retreat to her room. Instead, she looked at Ilara's maps with new interest. Will you show me, she asked, the places you have been, the roads you have walked? I have spent my whole life in one place, watching the same fields change with the seasons. I would like to hear about what lies beyond the horizon. Ilara's face transformed with a smile that seemed to shed decades from her features. It would be my pleasure, she said. And so they sat together as the afternoon lengthened, the old cartographer and the grieving farmer, tracing routes across yellowed paper and sharing stories of places real and remembered. The courier joined them, adding his own knowledge of the roads he traveled, and the three of them wove a tapestry of journeys that spanned generations and geographies. I listened from my place in the kitchen, moved by the way strangers could become companions so quickly when given the space to share their truths. This is what the inn does, I think. It creates pockets of time outside the normal flow, moments when the walls between people become thin and the things that separate us matter less than the things we share. The white candle on the mantel burned steadily, its flame unwavering despite the subtle drafts from the open windows. And if it seemed to lean slightly toward the table where those three travelers sat together, I chose not to comment on it. Some things are better left unmarked on any map. The 18th day of the 8th month, evening. The evening arrived gently, the light shifting through gradations of gold and amber until the common room was wrapped in the soft glow of approaching dusk. I lit the candles, including the white one on the mantel, and stoked the fear to take the slight chill from the air as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. The farmer, whose name I had learned was Henna, had retired to one of the private rooms to rest before supper. Elara remained at her table, sorting through her maps with the unhurried patience of someone who has no schedule to keep. The courier, Thomas, was helping me set out bowls and cups for the evening meal when the door opened again. Two men entered, and I knew immediately that they were brothers. It was not just the similarity of their features, though that was striking enough. They had the same broad shoulders, the same square jaws, the same hands, large and capable, marked with the calluses of physical labor. But it was something deeper than appearance, a quality in the way they moved and the way they occupied space, as if they had been shaped by the same forces and emerged with complementary forms. They were both young, perhaps 25 summers, and they wore the practical clothing of craftsmen, linen shirts beneath leather aprons, with tools hanging from their belts. One carried a carpenter's square tucked under his arm. The other had a mason's chisel strapped to his hip. "Good evening," I said, stepping forward. "Welcome. You look as though you could use a rest." The one with the carpenter's square nodded. His face was serious, almost somber, and there were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "A meal and a bed, if you have them. We have been on the road since before dawn." I showed them to a table and brought water, then ale when they requested it. They drank in silence, and I could feel the weight between them, a thickness in the air that suggested words left unspoken. Elara had looked up from her maps when they entered, and she watched them now with the keen observation I was beginning to recognize as her natural state. After a time, she rose and approached their table, one of her older maps in hand. "Forgive me," she said. "I could not help noticing your tools." "Are you builders?" The brothers exchanged a glance, and something passed between them that I could not interpret. "We were," said the one with the mason's chisel. His voice was deeper than his brother's, rougher around the edges. "We worked together for 5 years, building houses and barns and bridges throughout the Eastern Territories." He paused. "But we are going separate ways now. I am going west," the carpenter said. "There is a new settlement on the frontier that needs skilled hands. They are building a meeting hall, a schoolhouse, all the structures a community needs to take root. They have offered me steady work for at least 2 years, and I am going north," the mason said. "A monastery in the mountains is expanding, and they need someone who can work with the local stone. It is colder there and more isolated, but the work will be meaningful." Elara nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Brothers who build together, now building apart." The carpenter's jaw tightened. "We did not choose this, or rather, we did not expect it. When we finished our last project, we assumed we would continue as we always had. But then the offers came, and they were in opposite directions, and we realized that perhaps it was time. Time for what? Thomas asked. He had come to stand beside me, drawn by the conversation. Time to discover who we are without each other, the Mason said. There was a weariness in his voice that went deeper than physical exhaustion. We have been side by side since we were born. We learned the same trades, worked the same jobs, even courted the same woman once, though that ended badly for both of us. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. We are two halves of a single whole, our mother used to say, but perhaps it is time to see if we can be whole on our own. The carpenter was staring at his hands, his fingers tracing the worn edge of his carpenter's square. I do not know if I can do it, he said quietly. Every building I have ever made. He was there beside me. We designed them together, argued about them, fixed each other's mistakes. How do I learn to work alone when I have never had to? Elara was quiet for a moment. Then she unfolded the map she had been holding and spread it on their table. Look, she said, pointing to the western edge of the chart. This is the road to the frontier. And here, to the north, the path to the mountains. She traced both routes with her finger, and they diverged from the crossroads like branches from a trunk. You stand at a crossroads, she continued, not just literally, but in every sense. The road ahead splits, and you must each choose your path. But look here, she pointed to a spot far to the northwest, where the two roads seemed to curve toward each other. In 10 years, perhaps 15, these routes will meet again. The frontier settlements will grow, and they will need bridges to the northern territories. The monasteries will expand, and they will trade with the western towns. The world is smaller than it seems, and roads that diverge often find their way back to each other. The brothers leaned forward, studying the map. I could see them tracing the routes with their eyes, imagining the journeys that lay ahead. You think we will meet again? The carpenter asked. I think, Elara said, that brothers who have spent their lives building together do not simply forget how to find each other. You will carry each other in your work, whether you realize it or not. Every beam you set, every stone you lay will be shaped by the years you spent learning your craft side by side. And when the time comes, when the roads curve back toward each other, you will recognize your brother's hand in the structures you encounter, and he will recognize yours. The mason looked at his brother, and something passed between them. Not words, but understanding. The shared language of people who have grown up so close that they no longer need to speak to communicate. We should eat, the mason said finally, and sleep. Tomorrow we reach the crossroads, and then we part. You are at the crossroads, I said gently. This is it. The road north begins here, as does the road west. Both brothers looked at me, and I saw the realization dawn on their faces. They had been so focused on the journey to this point that they had not fully understood what reaching it would mean. Then this is our last night together, the carpenter said. His voice was thick with something he was trying to hide, for now at least. Then we should make it a good one, the mason replied. He raised his mug. To the roads ahead, and to the road that brought us here. The carpenter raised his own mug, and they drank together. The evening deepened around us. Henna came down from her room and joined the group at Elara's table, drawn by the quiet companionship that had formed. I served the stew I had been preparing all day, rich with root vegetables and herbs from the kitchen garden, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally from one topic to another. Alara told stories of buildings she had seen in her travels, strange architectures from distant lands that made the brothers lean forward with professional interest. The courier shared tales of messages he had carried, the joy and sorrow contained in letters that passed through his hands. Henna spoke of her farm, the rhythms of the seasons, the way the land taught patience to anyone willing to learn. And the brothers slowly began to share as well. They told of houses they had built, of problems they had solved, of the satisfaction of creating something solid and lasting from raw materials. They spoke of their childhood, growing up in a small village where everyone knew everyone, where two boys with their father's tools were put to work almost as soon as they could walk. As the night grew later, something shifted in the common room. The conversation quieted, and a different kind of sharing emerged, not stories, but something deeper. The things people carry that they rarely speak of, it was the carpenter who started it. "I'm afraid," he said quietly, "not of the work. I know I can do the work, but of being alone in a place where no one knows me, of making mistakes with no one to catch them, of discovering that the person I am without my brother is someone I do not recognize." His brother reached across the table and gripped his arm. "I am afraid too," he said, "of the same things and different things, of the silence in the mountains where there will be no one to fill the gaps in conversation, of looking up from my work and not seeing your face across the scaffolding." Henna was nodding, her own fears visible in her eyes. "I am afraid of arriving at my sister's house and realizing I have nowhere else to go, that this is the end of my story, the final chapter, with nothing left to write." The courier ducked his head, but he spoke as well. "I am afraid of the opposite, of being always in motion, always between places, never stopping long enough to build anything that lasts, of growing old without ever having planted roots." Alara was the last to speak. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "I am afraid of meeting my granddaughter and having nothing to offer her but these old maps, of being a stranger to my own blood, connected only by papers that might mean nothing to her, of dying without having mended what I broke with my daughter." The common room was very quiet. The fire crackled softly. The white candle on the mantel burned without flickering, and then, slowly, the weight of those shared fears began to change, not lifting exactly, but shifting, becoming something that could be carried together rather than alone. "I have learned," I said, speaking for the first time in a long while, "that fear shared loses some of its power. You have all spoken of what frightens you, and in the speaking, you have reminded each other that such fears are universal. Everyone who passes through this crossroads carries doubts about the path ahead. But the road is walked one step at a time, and the steps are easier when you know that others have walked similar paths before you." The carpenter looked at his brother. "We will write," he said, "every month at least, and if either of us needs the other, we will come, no matter how far the roads have diverged." The mason nodded. "Promise." "Promise?" Henna touched the wooden pendant at her throat. "I will carry my farm with me," she said. "In here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "And perhaps in time I will find new seeds to plant. A garden at my sister's cottage. Something small, but something that grows. Tomas, the courier, smiled for the first time that evening. And I will look for the roads between your destinations, the northern route to the mountains, the western path to the frontier. Maybe I will be the one who carries your letters to each other. Ilara gathered her maps with trembling hands. And I will give my granddaughter these charts, and I will tell her the stories behind them. Whether she values them or not, she will know that her grandmother spent her life trying to understand the world. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all any of us can offer. The evening wound down slowly after that. One by one, the travelers retired to their rooms, carrying with them the strange comfort of having been truly seen by strangers. The brothers went up together, their footsteps on the stairs, keeping time with each other, as they had done all their lives. Henna followed, then Tomas, then finally Ilara, who paused at the foot of the stairs to look back at the common room, at the fire, at the white candle burning steadily on the mantel. "Thank you," she said simply, "for this place, for making space for people like us." I nodded. It is what the inn is for. She smiled, and then she was gone, climbing the stairs with her satchel of maps pressed against her heart. I sat at my desk and opened this journal. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a soft red glow across the flagstones. The white candle burned on, its flame steady and bright. I wrote until the moon was high, recording what I had witnessed, the shared fears, the unexpected connections, the way strangers could become companions in a single evening when given the opportunity. These are the moments I live for, the moments that remind me why I keep this inn, why I welcome everyone who comes to the door. Tomorrow, the travelers will scatter. The brothers will take their separate roads. Henna will continue north to her sister's village. Tomas will set off on whatever route his duties demand. And Ilara will continue west toward her granddaughter and whatever awaits her there. But tonight, they are all here, sleeping under the same roof, their dreams mingling in the darkness, their stories intertwined for these few precious hours. The crossroads holds them gently, and so do I. The 19th day of the 8th month, morning. I woke to the sound of rain, not the heavy downpour of storms, but a gentle, steady fall, the kind that soaks into the earth and nourishes rather than floods. It had begun sometime in the night while I slept, and by morning the world outside was draped in silver gray, the roads turning to soft mud, the ancient oak drinking deep. The common room was cool and dim when I came downstairs, the fire from the previous night reduced to cold ash. I rebuilt it quickly, coaxing flames from kindling and adding larger logs until the warmth began to spread. Then I set about preparing breakfast, knowing that my guest would wake hungry and perhaps reluctant to face the wet roads. The brothers were the first to appear, descending the stairs together as they had done every morning of their lives. They ate in near silence, but it was not an uncomfortable quiet. Rather, it seemed like the silence of two people conserving their words for the farewells that lay ahead. After they had finished, they rose together and came to where I stood by the kitchen doorway. "We will be leaving soon," the carpenter said. "The rain will slow us, but we cannot delay any longer." He glanced at his brother. "We decided to walk together to where the roads actually split, another mile or so beyond the inn, one last stretch of shared journey before we part." I nodded. "There is bread and cheese wrapped for the road, if you would like to take some." They accepted the provisions, and then each of them shook my hand in turn. "Thank you," the mason said, "for everything, the food, the shelter, but especially for what happened here last night. I did not expect to find peace about our separation, but somehow being here, sharing our fears with others who understood, it helped." "This place has a way of doing that," I replied. "I hope your roads are smooth and your work is meaningful, and I hope they bring you back together again when the time is right." They turned and walked out into the rain, shoulders hunched against the weather, but steps steady. I watched them from the doorway as they crossed the muddy road and headed toward the place where north and west diverged. Just before they passed out of sight around the curve of the oak tree, they stopped. From my vantage point, I could see them embrace. A long, fierce hold between two men who had never known how to be apart. Then they released each other, exchanged words I could not hear, and walked in opposite directions. The carpenter headed west, into the gray curtain of rain, toward the frontier and the new community waiting to be built. The mason headed north, toward the mountains and the monastery that needed his hands. Neither looked back. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the rain fall on the empty crossroads. There is something sacred about such partings, I think, something that deserves witness. The morning continued quietly after that. Hannah came down and ate a slow breakfast, her eyes distant as she contemplated her own journey north. She would be traveling the same road the mason had taken, though her destination was closer. Before she left, she pressed something into my hand. "It is a cutting," she said, "from the rose bush my husband planted the year we were married. I took several when I left the farm, thinking I would plant them at my sister's cottage, but I want you to have one for your kitchen garden." I looked at the small wrapped bundle in my palm, the fragile stems protected by damp cloth. "I will plant it beneath the kitchen window," I said, "where it can see the morning sun." She nodded, satisfied, and then she was gone too, climbing onto her wagon and urging her horse out into the rain. The wagon creaked and groaned through the mud, slower than it would have been on dry roads, but moving steadily forward. Tomas left next, his courier's satchel slung across his chest, a determined set to his jaw. He was heading east, back toward the coastal towns and the messages waiting to be carried. "Find the old roads," Ilara called to him from her place by the fire, "the ones that do not appear on the merchant's maps. You never know what you might discover." He grinned, the first truly carefree expression I had seen on his face since his arrival. "I will," he promised, "and I will think of you when I do." Then the common room was quiet, with only Ilara and myself remaining. The rain continued to fall, softer now, and the fire crackled contentedly. "You are not leaving today," I said. It was not a question. Ilara shook her head. "The roads west will be mud for at least another day. And besides," she touched her satchel, which sat on the table beside her, "I find I am in no hurry. There is something about this place that makes rushing seem foolish." I brought her tea and sat across from her, and we talked for a long while about nothing in particular, and everything that mattered. The road she had walked in her youth, the inn's history as much as I knew of it, the travelers who passed through, and the stories they carried. It was nearly midday when the door opened again. The woman who entered was unlike any of the travelers I had seen thus far. She was small and quick, with dark hair cropped close to her skull and bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her clothing was practical but strange, covered in small pockets and pouches, and she carried a large basket strapped to her back that clinked and rattled with every step. She stood in the doorway, dripping rain onto the flagstones, and surveyed the common room with an expression of satisfied curiosity. "This is the Crossroads Inn," she said. It was not a question. "The one where the white candle burns." "It is," I replied, rising to greet her. "Welcome. Please come in and warm yourself." She shook the rain from her close-cropped hair and strode toward the fire with a purposefulness that suggested she always knew exactly where she wanted to be. When she passed the mantel, she paused and studied the white candle with intense interest. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The flame is perfectly vertical, no draft affects it at all, and the wax shows no signs of melting." She turned to look at me. "How long has it been burning?" "Since the first winter I kept this inn," I said. "A woman gave it to me," she said, "to welcome everyone who came to the door." The newcomer's eyebrows rose. "And you have never trimmed the wick, never needed to replace it?" "Never." She made a small sound of amazement and turned back to the candle, studying it from several angles before finally moving to sit at the table nearest the fire. "Forgive me," she said, settling onto the bench with the basket still strapped to her back. "I am Verity. I am an herbalist by trade, though some would call me something less respectable." She smiled, and there was mischief in her expression. "I have been traveling for several months, gathering plants that grow only in specific places, and this crossroads has been on my list for some time." "What grows here that you cannot find elsewhere?" I asked, bringing her water and bread. She accepted both gratefully, drinking deep. Before answering, "Crossroads are liminal places," she said. "Neither here nor there, belonging to all directions and none. In such places, certain herbs develop properties they lack elsewhere. Chamomile, gathered at a crossroads, soothes dreams more effectively. Rosemary, cut beneath a crossroads oak, strengthens memory. And there is a plant that grows only where ancient roads meet, a small flower with silver petals that blooms for 3 days each late summer." "I have never noticed such a flower," I admitted. "Most people do not. It is very small, and it grows close to the ground in the shadows of larger plants. But it is extraordinarily powerful. A single petal steeped in hot water can ease the pain of old wounds and old griefs alike." Ilara had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Her sharp eyes studied the herbalist with the same attention she brought to her maps. "You speak of crossroads as if they were special," she said. "I have spent my life mapping roads, and I have noticed something similar. The places where paths meet seem to have a different quality than the paths themselves, as if the intersections remember all the travelers who have ever passed through them." Verity nodded eagerly, leaning forward. "Exactly. Crossroads are places of accumulated intention. Every person who has ever stood at such a point and made a choice has left something of themselves behind. The roads themselves are conduits, channels for human purpose. But the crossroads are reservoirs, collecting all that purpose and concentrating it." She gestured toward the window, where the rain continued to fall on the muddy roads outside. "This crossroads is especially potent," she continued. I could feel it as soon as I came within sight of your inn. Whatever history this place holds, it has been accumulating for a very long time. The roads here are ancient, and the boundaries between worlds are thin. I thought of the white candle, burning without diminishing, the strange flame that never flickered, the woman who had given it to me, walking atop fresh snow as if it were solid ground. "What do you mean by boundaries?" I asked. Verity smiled, but there was something serious beneath the expression. "There are many worlds," she said, "not physical places you can walk to, but layers of existence that overlap our own. Most people never notice them because we are too focused on what is directly in front of us. But at crossroads, especially old ones, the layers come closer together. Things can pass between them more easily." "What sort of things?" She shrugged. "Dreams, memories, sometimes travelers who are not quite what they seem." She glanced at the white candle again. "Sometimes gifts that defy ordinary explanation." The rain continued to fall, the fire crackled, and I found myself wondering about all the travelers who had passed through this crossroads over the years, the centuries. How many of them had been ordinary people making ordinary journeys? And how many had been something else entirely after her meal? Verity ventured out into the rain with her basket, seeking the silver-petaled flower she had come for. Elara watched her go with something like recognition in her eyes. "There are more things in this world than in my maps can show," she said quietly. "I have always known that, but meeting someone who speaks of it so openly, it makes me wonder what else I have missed." "Perhaps nothing," I replied, "or perhaps everything. Either way, the world keeps turning and the roads keep filling with travelers." She nodded slowly, but I could see that her thoughts were far away, walking by paths I could not follow. The afternoon passed in quiet contemplation. Elara sorted through her maps, occasionally pulling one out to study it more closely, as if searching for patterns she had not noticed before. I went about my usual tasks, sweeping floors and preparing food and tending the fire. The rain slowed to a drizzle and then stopped altogether, though the clouds remained, keeping the light gray and soft. Verity returned as evening approached, her basket heavier than before and her face bright with satisfaction. "I found them," she said, entering the common room with the energy of a much younger woman. "A whole cluster of them growing in the shadow of your oak tree." She set her basket on the table and began carefully unpacking small cloth pouches, each one containing herbs and flowers I did not recognize. She had gathered not just the silver-petaled flower, but a dozen other plants as well, all of them native to crossroads and liminal places. As she sorted them, she explained their uses. This one for calming restless thoughts. This one for strengthening the heart against grief. This one for helping travelers find their way when all paths seem equal. Elara listened with growing fascination, occasionally asking questions about the places where Verity had gathered her specimens. The two women discovered they had visited some of the same regions, though decades apart, and their conversation wound through shared geographies and divergent experiences. By the time darkness fell, they had become something like friends, united by their different approaches to understanding the world. Elara mapped the physical landscape. Verity mapped the hidden one, and somewhere between their two perspectives lay a truth that neither could fully grasp alone. I lit the candles, including the white one on the mantel, and its steady flame seemed to approve of the connections being forged beneath it. The 19th day of the 8th month, evening. The clouds began to break apart as night fell, revealing patches of star-scattered sky through the gaps. The air was fresh and clean, washed by the day's rain, and the world outside smelled of wet earth and growing things. Verity had built a small fire outside near the base of the ancient oak to dry some of her gathered herbs. Ilara had joined her, and I could see them from the common room window, two figures silhouetted against the orange glow, their voices a low murmur beneath the night sounds. I was alone in the common room, wiping down tables and preparing to close for the night, when the door opened once more. The man who entered was tall and lean, with a weathered look of someone who had spent years outdoors in all conditions. His clothing was practical but worn, patched in several places with the careful stitching of someone who had learned to mend his own garments. He moved with a quiet hesitation, as if uncertain of his welcome. And when his eyes met mine, I saw something in them that I recognized. He was afraid. "Welcome," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Please, come in. You look as though you have traveled far." He nodded, but did not speak immediately. His gaze moved around the common room, taking in the fire, the tables, the white candle burning on the mantel. When his eyes landed on the candle, something in his expression shifted. Is this?" He started, then stopped. His voice was rough, as if from disuse. "Is this the Crossroads Inn, the one they speak of in the Eastern Territories?" "It is." I gestured to a chair by the fire. "Sit, rest. I will bring you something to eat." He lowered himself into the chair with the cautious movements of someone who had forgotten how to relax. I brought him stew and bread, water and tea, and he ate slowly, methodically, as if performing a ritual rather than satisfying hunger. After a time, I sat across from him and waited. He was a soldier. I could see it in the way he held himself, the way his eyes kept tracking movement at the edges of his vision, the small scars on his hands that spoke of combat. But there was something broken about him, too, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "I am gone home," he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I have been gone for 7 years, fighting in the northern border conflicts, then garrisoned at a fortress in the mountains, then stationed at various outposts up and down the frontier." He paused. "I received word that my father had died. The letter took months to reach me. By the time I read it, he had been in the ground for half a year." "I am sorry," I said. He shook his head. "I should have been there. I should have come home years ago when he first got sick. He asked me to, in his letters. Said he wanted to see me one more time before the end. But I kept putting it off. There was always another campaign, another duty, another reason to stay away." He fell silent, staring into the fire. "Why did you stay away?" I asked gently. For a long moment, he did not answer. Then slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. His hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped it, revealing a carved wooden horse, no bigger than his palm, worn smooth by years of handling. "My father made this for me," he said, "when I was a boy. I took it with him when I joined the army as a reminder of home." He turned it over in his hands, and I could see tears gathering in his eyes. But somewhere along the way, home became more of a dream than a memory. I could not quite remember my father's face, or the sound of his voice, or the way our cottage smelled after my mother made bread. It all faded until this horse was all I had left. He looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "I was afraid," he said, "afraid that if I went back, I would find that nothing was the way I remembered, that the home I had been carrying in my heart for 7 years did not exist anymore, that my father would look at me and see a stranger, not the boy who left." He shook his head. "And now it is too late. He is gone, and I will never know if he forgave me for staying away." The door to the common room opened, and Ilara and Verity entered, bringing with them the smell of wood smoke and wet grass. They paused when they saw the soldier reading the situation with the instinct of those who have spent their lives observing human nature. Ilara moved to sit near the fire, close enough to be present but not intruding. Verity busied herself at the far table, sorting her herbs, but clearly listening. The soldier did not seem to notice them. His attention was fixed on the wooden horse in his hands. Ilara spoke first. "I could not help but overhear," she said softly. "Your father is gone. I am sorry." The soldier looked up, surprise flickering across his face at her presence. He nodded but did not speak. "I, too, am traveling to meet family I have never truly known," Ilara continued. "My granddaughter. I was estranged from her mother for many years, and now my daughter is dead, and I am left with questions that can never be answered." She paused. "But I am going anyway, because the alternative is to carry those questions until they bury me." The soldier's jaw tightened. "What if she does not want to see you? What if she blames you for the years you missed?" "Then I will accept that," Ilara said, "and I will grieve what might have been. But at least I will have tried. At least I will not spend my remaining years wondering what would have happened if I had simply walked through the door." The soldier was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at the wooden horse again. "My father always said that home was not a place," he said slowly. "It was the people you loved and the memories you made with them. He said that even if the cottage burned down and the fields turned to dust, home would still exist as long as someone remembered it." Verity spoke from her table. "That is true of all things," she said. "The world we see is only the surface. Beneath it lies everything that has ever happened, preserved in ways we cannot always perceive. Your father is gone from this world, but he is not gone from the places where you loved him, and he is not gone from you." She rose and crossed to where the soldier sat. From one of her pouches, she withdrew a small dried sour, its petals silver white in the firelight. "This is a crossroads bloom," she said, pressing it into his palm alongside the wooden horse. "It grows where ancient roads meet, in places of accumulated memory. If you steep it in water and drink it before sleep, it will ease old wounds, not heal them. Some wounds never fully heal, but it will help you carry them more gently." The soldier looked at the flower, then at Verity, then at Ilara. His eyes were wet, but the terrible tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. "Why are you all being so kind to me?" he asked. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Ilara smiled. "We are all travelers here, all of us carrying things we cannot quite put down. Tonight we share a roof and east, and the strangeness of having met at all. Tomorrow we will scatter to the winds, and we may never see each other again. But for now, we are here together, and that means something. The soldier was quiet for a very long time. Outside, the clouds continued to part, revealing more and more stars. The white candle burned steadily on the mantel. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, less weighted. "I will go home," he said. "I will stand in the cottage where I grew up and remember my father the way he was. And I will forgive myself for not being there at the end, because he would have forgiven me. He always did." He tucked the wooden horse and the silver flower into his coat, close to his heart. "Thank you," he said, "all of you. I came here thinking I was alone in my grief. I did not expect to find that others understood. We do," Elara said simply. "Better than you might imagine." The evening wound down slowly after that. The soldier, whose name was Marcus, retired to one of the upper rooms to sleep. Verity stayed up late, drying her herbs by the fire and making quiet observations about the unique properties of plants grown at this particular crossroads. Elara sat with her maps spread before her, but I noticed she was not really looking at them. Her eyes were distant, focused on something internal. I wrote in this journal until the fire burned low, recording what I had witnessed: the soldier and his wooden horse, the herbalist and her silver flowers, the cartographer and her lifetime of roads, all of them drawn to this crossroads for different reasons, finding unexpected connections in the quiet hours of a rain-washed evening. The white candle burned on. Tomorrow, Elara will continue west toward her granddaughter. Verity will go wherever her search for herbs takes her next. Marcus will go south toward the home he has not seen in 7 years. And I will remain here at the center of the crossroads, keeping the fire lit and the doors open for whoever comes next. This is my purpose. This is my place. I understand that more clearly with every traveler who passes through. The roads lead here, and they lead away, and I am the keeper of the in-between. The 20th day of the 8th month. The morning dawned clear and golden, with not a cloud in the sky. The rain had washed the world clean, and everything seemed brighter, sharper, more vividly itself. The ancient oak stretched its branches toward the sun, its leaves rustling in a breeze that carried the first hints of autumn coolness. The roads, still damp from yesterday's rain, gleamed like ribbons of bronze in the early light. I woke before my guests, as always, and went downstairs to rebuild the fire and prepare breakfast. The common room was quiet and peaceful, filled with the soft light of dawn, and the white candle on the mantel burned with its usual steady flame. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the travelers who had passed through over the past few days. The brothers now walking separate roads toward separate futures. Hannah making her slow way north with her wagon full of memories. Tomas carrying messages between the coast and the frontier, perhaps already seeking the old roads that Elara had shown him, and Elara herself, still here, her satchel of maps waiting to continue its journey west. Marcus came down first, his step lighter than it had been the night before. He ate a quiet breakfast, speaking little but meeting my eyes with something like gratitude. When he rose to leave, he shook my hand firmly. I do not know what I expected to find at this crossroads, he said, but it was not this, not the kindness, not the understanding. He paused. I will remember this place, and I will come back someday when I have made my peace with what I left behind. You are always welcome, I said. The door is always open. He nodded, shouldered his pack, and walked out into the morning sun. I watched him take the southern road, his stride steady and purposeful, heading home at last. Verity left next, her basket repacked and strapped securely to her back. She paused at the door to look back at the common room, at the white candle burning on the mantel. This is a remarkable place, she said. The plants I gathered here have properties I have not seen elsewhere. I will need to come back, perhaps in different seasons, to understand them fully. You are welcome any time, I told her. She smiled, that quick, bright expression that seemed to illuminate her whole face. And you, she said, are remarkable as well. The keeper of the crossroads, I do not think that is an accident. Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, striding down the eastern road with the energy of someone who has many miles yet to travel. And then there was only Lara. She had come down while I was saying farewell to Verity, and she stood now by the large table where we had shared so many conversations over the past days. Her satchel was beside her, bulging with its precious cargo of maps, and she was looking at it with an expression I could not quite read. You will be leaving today, I said. It was not a question. Yes. She touched the leather of the satchel, a gesture that had become familiar over the past days. The roads are dry enough to travel. My granddaughter is waiting, and I have delayed long enough. I nodded, understanding. There comes a time when every journey must continue, no matter how pleasant the resting place has been. But Ilara did not move toward the door. Instead, she opened her satchel and began carefully extracting papers, spreading them across the table with the practiced movements of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times before. I want to show you something, she said. I came to stand beside her, looking down at the maps she had laid out. They were older than any she had shown before, the paper yellowed and fragile, the ink faded to the color of tea. The lines were still legible, but barely, and the handwriting in the margins was cramped and difficult to read. These are the oldest maps I have, Ilara said. I did not make them. They were given to me by my teacher, who received them from his teacher, who received them from someone whose name has been lost to history. She traced one of the faded lines with her finger. They show roads that no longer exist, routes that were ancient when my teacher's teacher was young. I leaned closer, studying the unfamiliar geography. The maps depicted a region I did not recognize, with mountain ranges and rivers and roads that wound through terrain I had never seen. Where is this? I asked. I do not know, Ilara admitted. I have spent my life trying to find it. The maps show a crossroads here. She pointed to a spot where several roads converged, and beside it, a structure that might be an inn, and beside that, a great tree. I felt something cold move through me. The map she was pointing to could have been a rendering of this very crossroads, this very inn, this very oak tree. But the style was utterly foreign, and the other landmarks bore no resemblance to anything I had seen. Is it this place? I asked. Ilara shook her head slowly. I do not know. Sometimes I think it might be. The proportions are similar. The positioning of the tree relative to the structure, but the surrounding geography is wrong. Unless, she paused, unless the land itself has changed over the centuries. Unless what we see now is not what they saw when they drew these maps. She was quiet for a long moment studying the ancient paper. There is something else, she said finally. She reached into the satchel again and withdrew a single sheet, smaller than the others, more carefully preserved. Look at this. It was not a map. It was a drawing, a rendering in faded ink of a candle, a white candle, tall and slender, with a flame that burned perfectly vertical. There were notes written beneath it in the same cramped hand as the margins of the maps. The ink was so faded I could barely make out the words, and Lara read them aloud. The beacon burns without diminishing. Its light guides those who are lost, and its flame leans toward those who need to find their way. The keeper of the crossroads tends it, as their ancestors did before them, as their descendants will do after. The road to the crossroads exists in all times and all places for those with eyes to see it. She set the paper down and looked at me. I have been carrying this drawing for 60 years, she said. I found it among my teacher's effects after he died, and I've been searching for the candle ever since. Searching for the crossroads that exists in all times and all places. And now, here I am, in an inn at a crossroads, with a white candle burning on the mantel, and I cannot tell if I have found what I was looking for or if I have simply imagined the connection. I looked at the drawing, then at the candle on the mantel. They were identical, the same slender shape, the same perfectly vertical flame. Even the holder looked the same, a simple disc of what might have been iron or bronze. I do not know what this means, I said honestly. The candle was given to me by a woman who came through here in my first winter as innkeeper. She walked on top of the snow as if it were solid ground. She blessed the inn and told me to welcome everyone who came to the door. That is all I know. Ilara nodded slowly. Then perhaps that is all we are meant to know. She began gathering her maps, returning them carefully to the satchel. But I will leave this with you. She pressed the drawing into my hands. It belongs here. It always did. I looked at the faded paper, the rendering of the candle that had burned on my mantel for years. It felt strange to hold something so old, something that depicted a mystery I lived with every day but had never fully understood. Thank you, I said. Ilara fastened her satchel and lifted it onto her shoulder. It seemed lighter than before, as if in giving away the drawing she had released some of the weight she had been carrying. And now, she said, I must go. My granddaughter is waiting, and I have 63 years of maps to give her. I walked with her to the door, and we stood for a moment in the threshold, looking out at the crossroads bathed in morning light. The ancient oak spread its branches overhead. The 4 roads stretched away in their cardinal directions, leading to mountains and coasts and frontiers and lowland ends. And the inn stood at the center of it all, solid and enduring. This place is special, Ilara said softly. I have known it since the moment I arrived. The roads that led me here are older than any map I have ever made, and the road that leads away will take me somewhere I need to go." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "You are the keeper of something important," she said. "Guard it well. And remember that the roads always lead back to those who tend the crossroads fire. We will meet again, you and I, though perhaps not in this lifetime." Before I could respond, she released my hand and stepped out into the morning. She did not look back as she walked down the western road, her satchel bouncing gently against her hip, her white hair catching the sunlight like a banner. I watched until she passed out of sight beyond the curve of the road. Then I returned to the common room, to the fire that needed tending and the candles that needed trimming. All except one. The white candle burned on the mantel, its flame steady and bright, leaning ever so slightly toward the door, as if waiting for the next traveler to arrive. I sat at my desk and opened this journal. The drawing Ilara had given me lay beside it. The faded rendering of the candle that matched the one before me, line for line. I do not know what it means. I do not know why the candle never diminishes, or why it was given to me, or what connection this crossroads might have to the ancient maps that have been passed down through generations of cartographers. But I know this: the inn stands at the center of something larger than I understand. The roads that meet here carry travelers from all directions, all walks of life, all stages of their journeys. And somehow, the act of welcoming them, of giving them rest and food and fire, is part of something that matters beyond the simple exchange of hospitality for coin. The old woman who gave me the candle told me to welcome them all. And so I have. And so I will continue to do for as long as I tend this hearth. The road led Ilara here. It led the brothers and Henna and Thomas and Verity and Marcus. It led them all here to this crossroads, to this inn, to each other. And then it led them away again, changed in ways both small and profound by their time beneath this roof. That is the gift of the crossroads, not the rest, though the rest is needed, not the food, though the food is welcome. The gift is the meeting, the intersection of lives that would never otherwise have touched. I am the keeper of that intersection. I am the tender of the fire that draws them in and the door that opens to let them pass. I am the constant point around which all these journeys pivot. And the white candle burns beside me, guiding them home.
And so the diary entry ends, the pages settling gently in the candlelight. The cartographer has gone west to meet the granddaughter she has never known, carrying 63 years of journeys in her worn leather satchel. The brothers walk their separate roads, building futures in different directions. The farmer travels north with her memories and her rose cutting, seeking a new place to plant roots. The courier seeks the old roads between the new ones. The herbalist gathers what grows in liminal places, and the soldier walks toward home at last, carrying a wooden horse and a silver flower close to his heart. But the inn remains, the crossroads remains, and the innkeeper writes on, recording the travelers who pass through and the stories they carry. If you found peace in this story, I hope you will return to the crossroads again. There are more entries in the journal, more travelers waiting to share their tales by the fire. Until then, may your own roads be smooth, and may you find rest whenever you need it. Good night, traveler. Sleep well, and may you always find your way home.